working? All right, everything's working. Hi, everyone. My name is Del Spoonmore. My wife and I, Carrie, here is are the creators of the Seed to Spoon mobile app. It's what's up here showing on screen. And basically, it's an iPhone and Android app that we built to help you grow food. So this is the first time I've tried a presentation where I'm going to use the app to drive the presentation. So bear with me here. This is literally my first time trying this presentation or this class or whatever we're calling this. So yeah, so just kind of a brief introduction. This is us here. This is our backyard here. I'm not sure how well this shows on screen in here. Can you guys see that okay? And if you download the app, all this is in the app. I'm just showing what's in the app. So if you want to have a closer view, you can search for From Seed to Spoon in any of the stores, and that's how you can find it. So it's going to look a little different than this because this update is not quite out yet. It's in the process of being released. So you may see things that are a little bit different, but for the most part, it's going to be the same. So this is our backyard here. Oh, I'm sorry, Annie. This is my friend Annie. I'm just being a jerk over here.
No, you're not a jerk.
She's here helping us out as well. She works at Precure Nursery right now, but she's done a lot of stuff. She worked with the Myriad Gardens. She worked with OSU. She was the county extension coordinator for Oklahoma County. She's a wealth of knowledge, and I'm really glad she's here because she's going to help me if I say anything wrong, she's going to catch me on it. And if there's anything to add, she's awesome. So
he doesn't say things wrong.
I'm sorry. No. That was a total jerk move of me to stand here.
He is the ultimate not jerk.
So this is Carrie and I's backyard here, and through the process of building this, I kind of felt like we could make a mobile app that could make it a lot easier because we were carrying around all these books. I'm a little autistic, and when I get obsessed about a subject, I go deep on it, and we had 20 or 30 books that I'm trying to manage and look through all the time, and which book was it that I'm looking in, and then we're looking at different resources, and I was constantly emailing the people like Annie here saying, what is this bug? Is it good or bad? So once we had gone through 3 or 4 seasons of growing, I felt like that we had gotten to the point where we were having a lot of success. We were having a lot of fun, and we wanted to make a mobile app to help other people because I've always been in software development, and it just kind of felt like what I need to do. So what this class is about today is how you can start growing food. So I kind of want to gauge the audience and see what kind of levels we have. Who's never grown anything? It's their first time growing food. Awesome. Who's been growing for a while, or what are the other categories? Awesome, cool, okay, cool. If you guys have any questions as we're going, feel free, just raise your hand. It's very informal. Just throw out questions. It's fine. So.
And I think there's probably a third category of people here that have never grown anything at all, right?
Yeah. So in the app, we have this How to Start tab. And I'm going to use this. I'm not going to be reading from the app. I'm going to use this as kind of the guideline of how we start, getting started. So we've broken this up into 7 steps of kind of how to grow food. And the first one is the most important. It's just choose the right location. So this is kind of the first thing to think about when you want to start a garden. And this is one thing that we did not do a very good job on because all these books that we read said that full sun was what we needed, right? Full sun is great. These books were written in the north. Full sun in Oklahoma is not full sun. Like that's extreme sun, especially in the middle of the summer. So you want to think about your property and your house as different types of locations that can be planted in. So if you have an area on the east side of your house that gets shaded in the afternoon, that's a great place for a lot of crops. And we'll go through and talk about what's good in each one. That in the app will help you with that part. But the main takeaway from this point is you want to think about your yard as all these different locations that are best suited to certain types of vegetables or different types of fruits. So in the full sun area, that's going to be something that like maybe tomatoes or cucumbers or okra are going to like, but spinach isn't going to handle it past April here in Oklahoma. So another thing you want to think about is the sun, because something I didn't realize, which I felt kind of silly about after I learned this, but the sun moves throughout the year. So it travels farther south in the sky or north in the sky, depending on where you are with the equator. But basically, the long story short is, this fence I have right here creates shade on the north side of it for 4 or 5 months out of the year. But when I first built my beds, they were in the part of the year that it didn't have shade, so I didn't anticipate that. So you want to think through your yard and where shade is going to be at all times of the year. You want to think through things like where wind really tough. If there's a place in your yard that's super windy, where things kind of whip around the house, that's not a good place, because your plants are going to be hurt through that. So That's kind of the first step, is to go through and think about those things. But you also want to think about convenience, because if the garden is too far away from your house and you never see it, it's the out of sight, out of mind thing. It's very true. The first garden I ever had 10 years ago when I tried to garden, it was a huge failure because I forgot about it, because it was out where I couldn't see it, and it just wasn't really something that I thought about a lot. So especially when you're starting out, having those gardens right outside your patio where you're cooking makes things a lot easier.
I want to add something.
Yes, jump in, please.
So the term that he's talking about is called microclimate, and you can actually create your own microclimates as well. Like, he's built these fences, and they've created these really cool trellises on probably the west side of your garden so that you can shade certain crops. Well, you can do that. Like, if you want to grow lettuce in the summertime, you can grow lettuce in between your 2 rows of tomatoes, and that's a term called intensive gardening. So just you can create your own microclimate, and wind isn't always a bad thing. You just want to grow a sturdy crop. Like, things get pollinated by the wind, so different things like corn really take advantage of the wind.
And there's other ways you can think about your bed too. I mean, you can think about not just your yard as a series of microclimates, but also just the individual raised bed itself. So if you have a raised bed, and on the west side of the bed you plant a bunch of tall stuff, that really likes sun, like okra, or like a rosemary bush or sage bush or something like that, it's going to get really big on the west side of your bed. And then on the east side of that, you can plant lettuce and spinach and that kind of stuff too. So you can create little micro. If you don't have a shaded area, you can create it. Like she said too, you can build. I take T-posts, and they have 8-foot T-posts at Tractor Supply, which makes this a little bit better. You just stick those in the ground and then just zip tie shade cloth to it, and it's on the west side of your bed, and it's a windbreak and it's a sun break. So, what's that? Shade cloth. You know that, like, they have different colors of it, but it's any big box store. You can get it on Amazon, but it's just kind of, or burlap works too. Any type of fabric that will create some shade. So oftentimes, anytime we go garage selling a lot, and we always see this kind of stuff just at garage sales. So we just have stockpile whatever we can find. Blankets work too. I mean, and we've done in extreme situations. We've had our backyard looks like, like just a bunch of, like, we're like drying our laundry or something, because there's sheets hanging everywhere. But in the middle of summer, sometimes it's just what you got to do. And then flooding too. You don't want to build something unless, raised beds you can get away with this a little bit more, but if you're planting in the ground especially, you don't want to plant in a place that collects a lot of water. So that's another thing to consider. So that's kind of the first thing to consider is location when it comes to gardening, like where you're going to build the beds. And now we'll move into talking about like what you actually do once you have the location. But are there any questions over location before we move on to the next one? All right. So the next step, once you have your spot picked out, there's a couple of different options here. You can plant in the ground, but I'm not going to talk a lot about that. Especially here in Oklahoma, it takes a lot of work to get going. There's probably going to be Bermuda grass there, which means you're going to have to, if you want to plant in the ground, you've got to scalp that Bermuda completely up. All of those runners that are down a couple inches, you got to get them all up, and it's a big chore. I've done it, but I would not want to do it on the scale that I've done on my raised beds. So I'm going to kind of skip over that. I will talk a little about the in the ground stuff here in a little bit, but it's kind of different. So basically, you want to do raised beds. It's a lot easier. They perform much better here in Oklahoma. They drain much better, so when we get those huge floods of rain, you're not going to have your crops washed out. You do have to water them a little more frequently than you would watering something in the ground, but there's ways you can mitigate that through automated irrigation, and I'll talk all about that here soon as well. Another thing I want to show is you don't have to build a raised bed. These here are called smart pots, and they're made out of fabric. And this one here is pretty good size here, you see. So we have these all throughout our backyard. And these are a great option for people that are starting out, because you don't have to go buy wood and cut it or do anything. You just literally plop this on the ground, fill it full of potting soil, and you're good to go. I was really skeptical on these when I first heard about them, because I thought this thing is going to get so hot in Oklahoma that it's just not going to survive. The plants are going to have to be watered all the time, because I had tried container gardening before that, but those plastic containers, I was having to water them like every day. I'd miss a couple days, my plants would die, so I'd kind of given up on the idea of container gardening, but these are a really good option to get started as well. And one thing about these is normally plants can only get air through the top, but with these plants, they're able to get air through the sides because when the roots hit the side of the container, they kind of stop there and form these little capillaries where they can still take in oxygen and other things like that. So normally, you know, when the roots hit the side, they start spinning around in circles, and then they're useless at that point. So
now's a good time to tell them how to sign in so that they can be part of a drawing.
yes. Oh, and for everyone that's recently come in, we're going to have a drawing where we have a whole box of these we're giving away. So that's how we know who to give them to is from the drawing. So yeah. So at the end of this, we'll be doing that. But you can also, you know, just build raised beds as well. So I've got. Let me switch to that other picture so you can see here. I warned you guys it was the first time of me doing this presentation this way. So you can see these here. See these boxes? Are those easy to see? So this basically just, you know, lumber that I got. The first beds I got, I bought lumber at just a big box store. But we realized after the first couple of beds that was not going to be it was going to cost a lot of money to keep scaling out. So we started doing things like reclaiming wood. So in our neighborhood, they're still building a lot of houses. And you can go up and talk to the foreman, and they always have scrap wood that's sitting on the side. So I had to go through and pull out a lot of nails on it. I mean, it was some extra work, but we saved a lot of money doing it that way. You can also just get pallets. So businesses all across the city have pallets stacked out back there, happy to get rid of. You can take those and then cut the wood off of that and use it. Yeah, go ahead.
At Precure Garden Center, or at least at my 63rd Street location, 63rd Meridian, every time I get a truck full of plants, there's so much lumber to hold each shipment of plants at each nursery together. So I've got fresh 2x4s. So if anybody's wanting wood, come by. Free.
One thing I do want to mention on the pallets, you want to make sure if you're going to get pallets that they're heat treated or that they're cedar. And basically the reason is that some pallets are treated with chemicals to keep them from breaking down. Those are chemicals you don't want to come in contact with your food. So if it's heat treated, it'll have an HT stamp on it with a circle. So that's a way for you to know. Or if it's cedar, then it'll smell like cedar. So I don't know a better way to describe what cedar is, but yeah. So those raised beds work really well too. The smart. I've done tests where I have the smart pots right next to the raised beds, and I've actually noticed my crops do better in the smart pots, but I don't have to water as often with the raised beds. So it's kind of a trade-off. And it kind of just depends on what you're growing. But really the most important thing is what you put in the raised beds. So that kind of takes us into the next one. Before I do that, are there any questions over raised beds or any of that? Or do I need to go over any of that in more detail? All right, awesome. So this is the biggest thing. It's not really what you fill that raised bed with is the most important thing when it comes to growing food, because that's where the plants get their food from. So you could buy potting mix and fill it with that, but I don't recommend that. We've never even tried that because just imagine spending $8 to $10 a bag for potting mix that you're filling, and one of these raised beds is going to take you 4 or 5 bags. I mean that gets very expensive in a hurry. You can save a lot of money by making it yourself. So you can actually mix in equal parts vermiculite, peat moss, and compost. And I'm going to talk about each of those, but I wanted to lift some off first. So the first one, vermiculite that I mentioned, it's a coarse rock that's mined out of the ground, and it's heated until it explodes. And once it explodes, it kind of becomes kind of like popcorn, so it absorbs water really, really well. And that's its only purpose. It doesn't provide any nutrition or anything for the plants. It's only there to absorb water and then release it when your plants need it. So it's the most expensive ingredient out of all of this. It's between $30 and $40 a bag. We're going to add a link into the app. You can actually get it on Amazon now, and it's actually a good deal for the first time. So they also have it at Precure Nursery too. I know they have it over there. It is one of those things where I've seen high fluctuations in prices. I've seen it 30 place, one place, 40 at another. So if you're going to build a bunch of raised beds, it's worth calling around, and you want to make sure you get the 4 cubic foot bags. These small bags that you see at the big box stores are not worth it. They're going to be like, don't even play that game. Just get the big bag. They're huge bags and they look super heavy, but you'll feel really cool because they're not. You can carry them around and you look, yeah. My kids love doing that. They always like. So peat moss looks heavy, and it is heavy, unfortunately, but it's cheaper. So you can get it, again, anywhere. It's at all these stores. It's about $12 a bag. You can substitute coconut coir instead of peat moss, Peat moss is not a renewable resource. It comes from forests up in Canada. It's the bottom. It's stuff that's been on the bottom of the forest for a long time, like decomposed humus and plant material and all this kind of stuff. So it's not technically a renewable resource. So obviously, that is a concern. So if that's something that you want to avoid, then you can use coconut coir instead, which is a renewable resource. It is more of a pain to use though, because you've got to hydrate it, you've got to let it soak in water overnight, and then do this extra stuff. So, but it is a replacement you can use as well. And then the most important part out of all of it is compost. So I get my compost from Minnick Materials here in Oklahoma City. They'll deliver as well. They've got really high quality stuff. You can make your own compost as well. We have a lot of videos on our website that talk about how we do that. But when you're starting out, you're probably going to want to buy in bulk, and that is an important thing to mention is you want to buy it in bulk. So if you have access to a truck, or I mean they do deliver, but if you can save yourself a lot of money, if you just take a truck like that. Oh, that picture doesn't show super well, but it's just I take my pickup truck, I put a tarp back there, and then they'll load it in the back, and then that's my workout for the day.
And their Minnick Materials is a certified compost, so you can feel really confident in using it. They have to be very careful with what they accept into their stations and things like that. So.
And I've tested their stuff heavily, and I have a video. By the way, I do want to mention, if you're getting your compost from a place that you're not 100% confident in, it's worth it to test it. Because the first year that I tried to grow food, I didn't test my compost, and I ended up killing about half my plants because it was contaminated. So a simple test you can do is you just plant peas in that compost, and after about 3 to 4 weeks, if there's no noticeable damage, and you'll be able to tell because it'll look all spindly and weird looking if there's something wrong with it. But I've got a video too that shows all this on our app. You just search for compost testing, and you can find that. But it is something if you're going to buy it from a place that isn't Minnick, I would recommend testing it. Especially if it's one of the places where you get the cheap compost, like the cities around here sometimes have compost available. I've used it and I've tested some of it and it's been great, but you just never know what you're going to get because the ingredients that go into that are unpredictable. Sometimes it could be golf courses or people that spray their lawn, or you have no idea what's going into that. And these new herbicides take a long time to break down, up to 3 years sometimes for this stuff to break down. So it's very powerful stuff. So that's really the most important thing about how to plant is what you fill the raised beds with. You don't want to skimp on the compost. If you want to skip on the other ingredients a little bit, that's fine. If you want to back down on some of the vermiculite, that's fine too. You can. I've done it a lot to save money. But the compost is the most important one, and it's not too bad. I think I pay normally $70 to $80 for a truckload of compost in Minnick, and that'll last me a long time, and that'll get you started with. This is really a rough estimate, but I would say probably 3 to 4 by 8 raised beds. That's completely, that may be off a little bit, but just kind of eyeballing it. So we don't spend a lot of money on compost. I think Carrie would be really upset at me if I spent too much money on dead materials and old cow poop. It did feel weird the first time I paid like $90 for old cow poop, but it works. Any questions about what you fill the beds with before we move on to the next part? Yeah, great question. I'm glad you mentioned that. So the question was, what kind of compost do I buy? When it comes to compost, the best thing you can do is have a variety of sources. So it's just like, when we eat food, right? The more different things we eat, the better, right? Same for our plants. The more access they have to different nutrients, the better for them. So when Minnick has 3 types of compost, I get a little bit of each. And when they're loaded up, you just tell them what you're trying to do, and they're really nice about it. Like they'll scoop half of a scoop of one, half a scoop of another, and they're really patient with you about it. And then I try and mix it up a little bit at home too, but that's what I try and do. And then I get compost from other sources, or I make some. Another thing you can do is there's a lot of places around here that have sources of bulk materials, like cottonseed factories that process cottonseed husks. You can get like the hulls that come from that, and then you can compost that. Starbucks, you can go in and get bags of used coffee grounds, and that's a great source of nitrogen in compost too. It's a great plant fertilizer too. You can sprinkle on your plants or on your yard, and it's a great source of nitrogen. So there's a lot of sources where you can get leaves are a great source too. And that's really what you got to think about, is just ways you can get things in bulk so you can save yourself some time. Andy, is there anything you want to jump in with?
No, you're doing great.
Okay,
I
all
mean,
right.
Sawmills,
Yeah.
pecan hulls. There's a place in Shawnee, I think is the name of the town that takes all the pecans from the state, and then those obviously don't get used, so you can load up your truck with pecan hulls for $30, and those add, I mean, especially if you're gardening in grounds, but I feel like it would work in your compost pile as well. It reduces the amount of water that it's holding onto, so you get better drainage. You can use it for mulch as well. So just thinking outside the box and stockpiling for creating your own compost is a great idea.
Worm bins are great too. Again, we got videos on our website showing how to do that kind of thing. But the idea is just taking, like, we take pretty much all of our plant scraps or kitchen scraps all goes into the garden eventually. It goes into the worm bin or in the compost or something like that.
Or rabbit too.
You rabbit, yeah.
Yeah. So that is one thing you want to keep in mind is wherever you get your compost from, if it smells or if it continues to break down, or if it's been sitting there for a little while, it's not finished. And so it's going to be what you call hot, and it could potentially burn your new seedlings. So you want to make sure that it's finished. So it should no longer resemble what it used to be ever. If you see pieces of food in there, it's an indication that it's not finished. And so, yeah, I could teach a whole class on compost, and we'll do that someday.
Yeah.
I think that would be great. But
it should smell earthy. Like, yeah, you'll notice it when you smell it. Like, that's a key thing to, when I first started gardening, I was so scared that I was going to do the wrong thing, especially when I was doing things like making compost tea and all these things. But your nose will guide you. If it smells off, you know something's wrong. If it smells earthy, I mean, you kind of follow your nose on it. So, I mean, we've been doing this as a species for a long time, you know, so these instincts are kind of built into us once you start doing it more.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
We've had a garden for the last, I guess it would be our third year that we've done it, but it is in ground.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty decent size for a backyard. My husband this year he wants to add mulch to it, even though we rototilled it and we've added weeds and we actually had we had our first compost that we made in our composting. Is that really necessary to add mulch? Because I thought we did really well for the first 2 years.
Do you want to just add mulch on top of the plants, like?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're definitely as the season goes.
We have like used leaves and some mulch, but I just don't know if it's.
You mean wood chip mulch?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what he's wanting to do.
So for some plants, you're definitely going to want to, but it's kind of a phased thing. So here's how I do tomatoes, for example. When I first plant tomatoes, they're not going to have mulch around them much, right? And then as it starts to get hotter, I'm going to add more mulch, but start with leaves. And the reason for that is because wood chips can actually take nitrogen out of the soil. It's not a lot, but still, like, it could work against you. And worms don't really love wood chips as much as they do the leaves and stuff. So what I do is I do a layer of shredded up leaves first, and then I start adding the wood chips on top of that. So by the middle of summer, I've got a lot of wood chips. And I've done tests where I had like a smart pot that wasn't mulched versus one that was, and I took one of those laser temperature guns out and then moved away the soil, and there's a huge difference. So in the middle of summer, it's definitely one of the biggest things you can do to help from having to water as much. And there's actually this whole gardening method, which I think you should look into since you're already growing in the ground, called Back to Eden. And basically the idea is you cover everything with a foot of wood chips. And I should have talked about this earlier. I should talk about this now. When you build your raised beds, right, you're still going to have Bermuda grass around that, and you're still going to have Bermuda you got to deal with. And the way that you can get rid of that Bermuda is to lay down cardboard. So put 2 layers of cardboard down if you can, and then cover that in a foot of wood chips. And this is similar for you too, because what happens is the wood chips and the cardboard all breaks down, and worms come up, and then that turns into really good soil. So the thing that I don't really use mulch much on things like lettuce and spinach and kale, because I don't want to, when I'm harvesting the greens, I don't want it to get all caught up. So in those raised beds, I keep them clean, like pristine, right? But then where my squash goes and tomatoes and all that kind of stuff, then I use the mulch around that. So that's kind of how I view wood mulching and how I do mulching. Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions before we move on to the next step? Yes, ma'am.
Wood chips and the dye. I mean, that dye can be good for you.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you. Yeah. So on wood chips, you can get them for free actually from the city of Norman. So compost facilities, I know I mentioned like to avoid the compost, but the wood chips I'm completely okay with, because literally it was a tree a week ago, and I've been there and I've seen them take a giant tree and run it through the chipper. So I'm not worried about that tree being contaminated with anything, right? So and they have huge piles of wood chips down in Norman, and they're eager to get rid of them. They only care about where you live if you're bringing stuff in. If you're buying from them, especially the wood chips, which are free, if you're just taking that, they're more than welcome to get rid of them. So the same way I do compost, I just take my truck in, they have a tractor, they load it with a bunch of wood chips, and that's my free gym membership. My daughter and I here can unload a, Brooklyn and I can do a truck in about 45 minutes. It's not too bad. And it's free and it's not dyed at all. There are some concerns where people, don't want to get specific tree varieties, I've never had any issues with anything like that. Everything I've gotten has been either cedar or something. There's a million cedars around here, so that's a lot of what goes through there.
But it does change the acidity of the soil. Like if I were to put certain mulch, you have to be careful of that too.
It could if you did pine or something like that. But Andy, correct me on this one,
I'm gonna
because
add to that.
yeah, go ahead, Amy, take this one over. If you don't mind.
Well, I don't wanna take it over.
Okay, and this is have you heard of the Mike McGrath podcast, the You Bet Your Garden podcast? It's a really good one. I recommend it if you haven't heard of it. He was the editor of the Organic Gardening magazine for a long time, and now he has a podcast, and it's kind of a call-in show, and this is a question that comes up a lot, and it seems like basically a lot of the research shows that even like pine needles themselves, if you use them as straw, it takes so long for it's not going to affect the pH of that soil because yes, they are more acidic, but on the grand scale of things, it's not enough to actually impact it. So, Annie, do you want to add anything to that, or Claire?
That's pretty much what I was gonna say, and what I teach all my customers, and as an extension agent. I mean, what we learned, and I'll back up all the way. Earthkind gardening is a research-based, organic gardening method to kind of dispel the myths and bring science into organic gardening. And what we found is that if you can use the wood mulch that has the tree part still in it, the leaves, and the smaller branches, then that brings the carbon and nitrogen balance into the ratio where it will help break down and it will steal less nitrogen from your soil, which is really what's important for your vegetable crops. And so if you're going to use wood mulch, try to use wood mulch that you can get from like the city after a big ice storm, because it's already going to have that green in it or something like
Great
that.
point, yeah. And a lot of the stuff down in Norman, they have a pile that's just straight wood chips. But they'll have another pile too that has a lot of leaves and stuff like that mixed in. So like generally what I'll do if I'm filling out a new area, the first couple rounds of stuff that I get is filled with all that stuff, right? And then the last layer, that kind of the dressing that goes on top to make it look nice, is the just wood chips. If I'm like, building out a new area, but you can get different types of stuff as well.
For example, at Precure, we get tree companies come and ditch stuff at our place all the time. But then I have the employees bring their bagged green clippings from their lawns and things like that, and you add that to it and it breaks it down. So that's what's important. And then also, you're exactly right on. I mean, we can add pure ammonium sulfate to a 7.8 soil pH, and it reduce it like by half of a point, which is an exponential thing over 5 years. And then we're battling a high pH of water as well. So yes, it can help, but it's over the long run is not going to be a big deal. So that's why it's important to just grow what works in the soil that you're growing in. And I love gardening in the ground, and some things taste really good in the ground, but with the raised bed method, you've got a pretty neutral pH anyway. So that's one thing to go with too.
That answer your question? Awesome. Any other questions before we move on to the next step? So this is the funnest step, the start planting step. So this is one thing I'm going to show the kind of the app as we go through, kind of show how you can see when to plant and all of that. I guess I'll just kind of jump over now. So basically, this is where you want to choose what you want to grow. So over on this grow tab, we have all the different things you can grow, and you can filter down here. And we're adding more filters. Right now, we have cool season, warm season, and perennial. We're going to be doing things like adding what can be planted right now. So I'm going to filter down to cool season because that's kind of where we are right now. We're still a little early to plant most things. And we're going to choose broccoli, for example. So we click on broccoli, you can pull it up, and it's going to use your nearest weather station to give you the exact dates for when you should plant. So it's going to give you a range of dates. This early date is the one that is a 50% chance it's going to be successful. Most years that it's going to work out. This other one is a 90% chance. So it kind of gives you a range you can work off of, and every vegetable is going to be different. So You can kind of go through and see, and we're going to be adding more things into the app that do things like build a calendar for you and send you reminders and all that kind of stuff. We're building out that whole infrastructure now. So, but right now you can go through so you can see those dates. And then once you have the dates, you can scroll down and you can see from there how to plant it. So we plant, there's this book called Square Foot Gardening. Has anyone heard of it? Let me switch over to another tab so I can show you something that helps illustrate this point a little bit. So can y'all see this green thing up here that has little holes in it? Okay, so square foot gardening is basically you take every square foot of your garden, you divide it into squares just like that. And every plant has a certain number that can be planted per square. So if it's 1 per square, the seed goes right into the left. If it's 16 per square, it goes in every red dot. And you can go through and plant that way. So that's what it means over here whenever we say number per square. So that's all that means. So you don't have to go by that, but it's a really good way to keep your spacing down. But I do want to mention too, like things like broccoli. I won't just plant one seed in the middle of a square. Broccoli is something that you can eat no matter how big it is. So even when the plants are that big, you can eat them and they're incredibly healthy for you at that stage. So I'll plant a whole square of broccoli and then I'll thin it down to just one. So the biggest one survives, but all the others just are snacks along the way. And this term is called microgreens. Has anyone heard the term microgreens before? Or sprouts? It's kind of all the same idea, is that plants, seeds naturally have a ton of energy in them, right? I mean, think about everything they're doing. They have all the energy stored. But whenever that seed goes through the first round of photosynthesis too, so it sprouts, and then it gets some energy from the sun, and has even more stuff available. There's a lot more vitamins and nutrients that are added during that process. So things like broccoli, you can grow them as sprouts and then harvest them then, and they're incredibly healthy for you. So this is a way that you can kind of do that and grow them to full size too. So cabbage, broccoli, pretty much anything in the kale family, and that type of family of plants you can do that with.
To that effect, you can also it's called succession planting. Like maybe one square you plant this week and then another square you plant the next week, so that you've got a continuous harvest throughout your season.
Yep, good point. So as you scroll through, you can continue to see like the information on how to grow it. So you can see how long it takes to harvest. You can see what kind of sun requirements it has, what kind of watering requirements. And this takes us down to the planting method. So there's 2 main ways that you want to plant. The first one is going to be with seeds. Most things can be planted that way. You literally just stick a seed in the ground, that's all you got to do. There are some things you're going to have to transplant outside. And that means either you're going to start it indoors and move it out, or you're going to buy it at a nursery and then put it in your garden. The reason for that is that things like broccoli and cabbage and peppers and tomatoes would take too long to grow from seed if you put it in the ground. So we've got to start those indoors in January or February when it's too cold for them, and then move them outside. But pretty much everything else except for those 4 things I mentioned and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts, you don't have to do anything but just stick a seed in the ground. So and this will guide you through how to do that. So if this was something, I'm going to switch to carrots so you can see what it looks like whenever it's a seed. So it tells you exactly how far down in the ground to put the seed, how long it takes for it to sprout. If it's a seed, you're going to want to keep that seed moist until it sprouts, especially things like carrots or things that have a longer period. If you haven't had success with carrots, it's probably because it didn't stay moist while it was trying to germinate. So I'll talk, when we get to the watering section, I'll talk about how we can help keep that happen and stuff. But the height is important because when you're thinking about your garden, you want to think about, like I mentioned earlier, the microclimates. So if you have a plant that's 4 feet tall, you don't want to have it on the south side of your bed because it's going to shade everything on the north side of it, so you want to put that stuff on the west side of your bed or on the north side of your bed. So we're going to be adding features that illustrate this better. We like to have a visual component so you can draw out your beds and it'll place it for you and all that kind of stuff. But I think this might have to be my full-time job before I can finish that. So we have information on here about how to harvest and how to cook as well. And we have a lot of blog posts on our website for each vegetable. Almost for each vegetable. We're building them out. But Carrie is really, really good at being able to find recipes on how to make things taste good. And she does a lot of blog posts and videos that show that. So you can scroll down into here and see any blog post about that vegetable. It gets pulled into here automatically. And you can tap on that. So that's a way to see different ways to use recipes and things like that. And then we do have, for the smart pots here that we've talked about, we have, if you want to get those, you can buy them through our app. which by the way, it's a free app, but it's supported through ads through Amazon. So we get a small percentage of every purchase on Amazon, and that's how we're going to support the app. So, so I'm going to jump back over to this planting step here.
Can
Andy,
I add something
yeah,
about
jump
the
in.
app?
Yeah.
What's cool about the advertisements that are in the app is they're applicable. They're chosen. He knows that they're successful, so they're handpicked. It's not bad. It's good. Actually.
This is all stuff we buy,
It's
stuff we believe
beneficial.
in. The first time we tried to add ads into the app, I did that like kind of random ad thing, and it was like, "Is your wife cheating on you?" And it was like one of those like stupid ads. It's like, yeah, no. So I kind of I thought about it, and I realized there's a lot of stuff we're buying and products I believe in, like this soil knife right here. It's like a $30 soil knife, but it's a really good knife. Like these are only things in here that I use or I recommend. So, and we'll talk more about how it can actually help guide you through when we get to different steps. So I do want to talk about transplants though. So we mentioned how to start seeds. If it is something you're going to be transplanting, there are some steps you want to take to help that transplant process go more successfully. The first one, and one of the biggest mistakes I made when I first started, was I would buy plants from the nursery and I'd immediately stick them in the ground. Well, those plants from the nursery have been in sheltered conditions their whole life. They've been in a greenhouse. They have people like Andy coming by and checking on them every day. They've been catered. They've been really taken care of. Once you take them home and put them in your garden, those are conditions it's not going to be used to. So it's going to be full sun, this Oklahoma wind, all these bugs that are trying to get them, all these new pests that are coming out. There's all these things that are coming at it. You want to help ease the plants into that. So this is about a week or 2 week process where basically you're going to take those plants and kind of slowly introduce them. So the first day you're going to take them and put them outside in the conditions for maybe like 2 or 3 hours. And then you bring them back in. And the next day is a little bit longer. And then maybe 4 or 5 days into it, you leave them outside for the first time. And this is very dependent on weather. I mean, I've been hardening my plants off for a few weeks, but the past 2 days I've been inside because it's too crazy for them out there. So you're just going to watch the weather, and then after about a week or 2 of this, they should be okay to go ahead and go outside. And then once they're outside, you want to make sure you keep them watered for at least a week or 2, watering them every day, because those roots have to develop, and the plants are going to be stressed. They can really use the water, but then you got to back off. Because another one of the biggest mistakes I made was watering too much plants that were developed. So we'll get into talking about watering here in a minute.
Sounds a lot like parenting.
It is. I'm not going to get too deep into starting seeds indoors, but if it is something that you want to do, I have a guide on my website that shows how you can build just basically taking a wire rack shelf into like those 5 shelf racks, and you can put just regular shop lights on there. And I get shop lights off of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace for 10 to 15 bucks all the time. And that's an easy way to start seeds. You don't have to worry about the color of light or anything like that. If you start looking online, you're going to get confused in a hurry because there's so much stuff out there. But if you're just starting seeds, it doesn't matter. Pretty much any light that's this type of color here, that bright white light, is going to work. And you want the seeds to be about 2 or 3 inches away from the light. And again, I've got a guide on my website that walks you through all that. I don't want to go too deep into that, or I'm going to run way past 8 o'clock. So, and then lastly, crop rotation. You don't want to plant something in the same place every time. You want to move things around. The reason for that, well, a couple reasons. Number one, pests. If they find a plant, they're going to lay their eggs for their offspring right next to that plant. So the next winter they hatch and the food's right there. Well, if you move things around, now those pests have to journey all the way across the yard, and you've got spiders and other praying mantises in the way to eat them while they're on their way. So another thing is diseases and things like that. Those are very similar. They stay in the soil right there. So when you move things around, then you can help mitigate that. But then also plants. So tomatoes, all tomatoes like the same things. They like a bunch of nitrogen in the beginning. That they're going to use a lot of phosphorus once they're fruiting. They're using the same nutrients, right? But if you rotate from carrots to cucumbers and then things like that, well, these plants use different nutrients, so they're not going to use up everything in the soil. So rotating helps with that also. Any questions before we move on to watering? All right. Watering. Okay. So, Annie, you want to jump in?
You're good.
Okay. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
With fertilizing, it's the stage of the plant when it's important that it's got the right amount of nutrients. So after it's flowering and it's starting to create those fruits is when you want to give it some nutrients. And you can do that by just top dressing around that individual plant. Or when you're making your soil, you can put fertilizers into that soil. But the second year, when you have your heavy feeders in that location, you're probably want to get a mix into that again. But also adding that compost to it every year is going to help relieve disease pressure, pest pressure, and help with fertilizer.
I'm glad you mentioned that too. So we mentioned the soil mix earlier. The peat moss and the vermiculite you never have to buy again. That's just, you've got what you got in there and you're fine. But you are going to add compost every season. So at the beginning of the season, you add about an inch or two of compost everywhere throughout the garden. Mix that in to the top couple inches, and then I don't buy any other fertilizers really. I buy fish fertilizer, which is a source of nitrogen. It's literally just dead fish liquefied and put in a thing. You mix it with water and put it on your plants. So I use that. Depending on the plant, I want to build something into the app that walks you through when to do this because it's not real clear right now. But basically, with most things, it's about every 3 weeks. But like she mentioned, on the things that fruit, so on tomatoes and cucumbers and things like that, you want to back off from the fish fertilizer once it starts developing fruit because it won't produce fruit if it keeps getting nitrogen. So again, we'll get all this into the app soon. So I know it's a lot to memorize
Well,
that
and
part.
just also over fertilizing with synthetic sources without using trade names. Too much nitrogen is going to create too much vegetative growth too quickly, and that increases pest pressure because those pests go, man, there's this like really wet, just juicy, yummy plant material, and they just attack. So that's when you're going to be getting your aphids and your spider mites and just all of those things. You're going to be fighting yourself if you over fertilize.
And your plants will tell you when they need it. Like when they start to turn a little yellow. Now, yellowing can mean overwatering, but most of the times it means that it needs more nitrogen. So if you just look at your plant, if you see it going a little yellow, that's generally when it's a good time to hit it with a little nitrogen. If we get a heavy rain that comes in, that can wash out nitrogen. That's another good time. So let's talk about watering. You can, water, just, handheld. The problem is that leads to errors, especially with us. It did the first year and a half. I'd be really good about watering for a couple of days, and I'd water way too much, and then I would forget, and I would have had very inconsistent watering, and that leads to a lot of problems. So what I ended up doing was I built drip irrigation systems, and I feel like I keep saying this, but again, on our website we have a guide on how to build these. We have one that's built out of PVC. So you take PVC pipe and you drill holes every 3 or 4 inches, and you hook that up to a water hose, and it just waters the whole bed at once. And you can hook that up to a timer. So we have an Orbit automated timer that just kicks on automatically every day at a certain time or whatever we set it, and that handles our watering for us. But then they also have this drip irrigation tubing that has emitters that let a certain amount of water out, so 1 gallon per hour, 2 gallon per hour, whichever one you go with. You can water a lot more at a time with those. Again, I've got details and videos that show all about how to build it, but you want to have a drip irrigation system that's automated because it's going to make it to where you're not going to have as many errors. It's going to make your life a lot easier. And then in the middle of July and August, when you don't want to be out there watering, it's going to be watering for you. So yeah, that's definitely something you want to look into. If you are going to hand water or use a sprayer, it's important not to spray the leaves of the plant. That's how a lot of diseases can get spread on a plant, is you spray the leaves, the disease gets in that water, moves to another part of the plant. That's how diseases can move around a plant. It can also lead to issues with fungus because the leaves stay wet and fungus is able to grow on the leaves. So when you're watering your plants, you want to water them at the base of the plant. And if you can water in the morning, that's best before the sun really gets going. Give it a good deep watering. As far as how to know when to water and all of that, that's a tricky one. And the easiest way I've found to explain it is this is my watering process. I water my beds really, really well until water is flooding out the bottom and I know that every inch of that bed is soaking wet. And then I don't water again until I can put my finger in the soil and about 2 or 3 inches down, it's dry. And then I water again. So that changes all the time. Right now, it's like once a week. In June or July, it might be every 3 days, or sometimes when it's 100 degrees, it might be every day. It changes all the time, but that's a good way for you to kind of measure when it needs to be done. And the longer that you do this and the more that you do it, it'll just become second nature. And you'll be able to look at the plants too. Like if they're like a little wilty, they'll tell you. But one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to overwater. So you don't want to be watering a bunch every day. Plants need oxygen just as much as they need everything else. And when they're always in water, they're not able to get oxygen. So, anything we
It
need to add?
makes that root system just go down further into the soil and work harder to get the water at the beginning. So it expands the root system when you make it grow in that direction. And that's another part of why the beds are good. The smart pots are good is because it helps draw those roots out and down. It has a better, healthier root system when you grow in those pots, and it's just amazing what they do. But then also, yeah, Botany of Desire is a fun book. It talks about how plants want to take over the world. I don't know if you guys have read it or not, but you basically want to make your plants think that they're not thriving, and that makes them set fruit.
Yeah. Any questions about watering before we move on? All right, next on the list, feeding your plants. So we've already talked about this a little bit. I do want to mention soil tests though. Now, if you're growing in raised beds and you just built the mix that we talked about earlier, you don't need to do this because that compost has everything you need in it. But if you're growing in the ground, you're going to want to do a soil test so you can see what that soil has and what kind of nutrients it has. You can get them actually here or at any of the county extension offices. So Cleveland County, Oklahoma, any of these, if you go, every county has an extension office you can go into. You take a soil sample, you just get random collections from around your garden, take it in, and then a couple weeks later, you'll get a report back that has a listing of exactly how much nitrogen your soil has and everything, and exactly what they recommend you should do to improve that. So, or to fix that situation. So I definitely recommend a soil test if you're growing in the ground. Again, if you're doing smart pots or raised beds, I really don't think you need them. I mean, that's kind of the beauty of all that is you don't have to worry about all that kind of stuff and pH, because if you're building the soil mix the right way, it's going to have everything in it. But again, that's why compost is so important, because if you skimp on compost, and it's not going to have everything in it, and then you're going to have problems.
It's a little bit more than random.
Sorry, yeah, that's a good point.
You gotta go 6 inches down, and you need to remove the foliage from the top of the surface. So 6 inches down in 12 to 15 places, then mix that all together and bring a Ziploc bag, it's a sandwich size bag, into the extension. And that's what's gonna get you an accurate soil test. Because if you bring just random soil from the top inch everywhere, then that's gonna be the healthiest soil, and it's gonna come back with more nutrients than as actually.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Yeah.
And then also so in the app we have, so the soil test is going to recommend things, and it's probably going to recommend chemical fertilizer. And I'm not going to go on a diatribe about all that, but if you don't want to use chemical fertilizer, I have recommendations in the app for how you can replenish each one of those nutrients with natural resources or with organic means. So we don't worry a lot about fertilizing though. We really don't use it much. Like I said, every 3 weeks on the fish fertilizer, or if a plant looks a little sick, or if it needs some help, I'll do fish fertilizer. It smells really bad, I'll warn you up front, and your dog will definitely want to dig in your garden, so I had to build a whole fence to keep my dog out, but I'd rather do that than the chemical stuff. And it's sustainable. I mean, if I had to, I could go catch fish and make my own, you know? Oh, we have a...
Question. My husband's actually been doing that.
Oh, yeah.
When he caught fish, he's skinned them and he's planted them in the garden.
That's perfect.
Are you sure we should be doing that?
That's perfect, yeah. That's exactly how the Indians did it. Yeah. I mean, we were doing that a while back, but now we have so many kids that we can't add on trying to do that too.
Right.
I tried to talk her into it. I was like, how bad would it be? Like, we just go and yeah. So, but we do have a rabbit too. So we have a Flemish giant rabbit. He's a huge rabbit. And that's a great source of fertilizer too. Because rabbits, you don't have to wait for their manure to break down before you can use it in the garden. So, yeah. Okay, so we're at the point now where the easy part. So harvesting, the app is going to walk you through when to do that. So if you just go into any vegetable, it's going to tell you when you should look to harvest. So right now we have like the actual days listed. We're working on features that do things like let you log when you planted something, and then it's going to use that date to tell you when your window is to harvest. So be looking for that stuff coming soon, but this should tell you, how to know when to harvest and all that. Each vegetable is different. So that, again, the app will walk you through that part. And then cooking and preparing is kind of the same way. Every vegetable is going to be different, and we have all the blog posts down here at the bottom again that go through and show you for each one. So something I realized we haven't talked about at all yet, I guess a little bit, is pests. So we have a little bit more time for A, so I'm going to go into these for sure before we run out of time there. So I mentioned when I first started, one of the hardest things was knowing what was a good bug and what was a bad bug. And here's why you should care. Because I don't know the number, like 80% of the insects in the garden are beneficial, maybe more.
Yeah, most of them.
Most all of them are actually good for your garden, and you want them to be there. So you've got to know which ones are the bad ones and which ones are the good ones, and that's when I spent a lot of time in the beginning trying to figure that out. So we built this interface that makes it easy for you to know. So you can scroll through here, and you can see on the left side is a picture of the larva, if applicable. Obviously, cats are just cats. And on the right is the adult. So you can scroll through, and you can look and see, oh, well, that's the thing that's been on my plants. Tap on it, and then it'll recommend what you can do about it. So for cucumber beetles, you can either buy traps or we make our own traps. So it tells you how to do that. For any type of caterpillar, like a cabbage worm, you can do insect netting, which is a great treatment option. Or they have this stuff called BT. How do you pronounce the full BT? I know you can.
Bacillus thuringiensis.
Yeah.
But then there's different strains of it for different types of caterpillars.
Yeah. So, but this is something you can put on your plants, and when caterpillars eat it, they die. It's organic treatment. It's a naturally occurring soil bacteria that naturally control caterpillars. So again, it's a way of using nature to your advantage, and we have concepts like that all throughout the app. So if you go to aphids, for example, you'll read that ladybugs really like aphids, and you can buy ladybugs or you can encourage ladybugs easily. So that's how we handle pests in our garden. We don't do any pesticides. I guess BT is technically a pesticide, but it's an organic treatment. We don't do any, traditional chemical pesticides. We try and use nature to our advantage. We use things like buying praying mantises online and encouraging things like spiders. And Carrie had to get over that one. She hates spiders, but now she's starting to come around on it. Companion planting. So like I mentioned before, not planting a whole bed of. I guess I haven't really talked about that. I need to talk about that because it's super important. And I can show part of the app with that too. I told you guys this is my first time. Next time I'll be more organized on this. So companion plants. I mentioned earlier some of the concepts about like the microclimates in the bed and all of that. Companion planting is really where that comes in. So if you go to each vegetable, you can tap on companions and you can see all the things that grow well next to that. And some of these may be on the list because like rosemary and oregano, for example, are great companions for everything because they smell so strong that they make it hard for pests to find the plant they're looking for. Because that's how pests find what they're looking for is through smell. So if you have a whole bed full of tomatoes, it's really easy for the tomato hornworm to find it. But if you have tomatoes and it's surrounded by basil and you have a rosemary and an oregano here, that it throws off the scent and it's hard for them to find it. So other things in here are companions because like maybe sage is great to be on the west side of the bed to shade lettuce. So there's all sorts of reasons for each thing being a companion, but each thing on here is going to grow well next to whatever it is you're looking at. And then on the other hand, there's things you want to avoid. So if you go to the bad list, these are the things you don't want to grow next to that item. And it may be because broccoli and cabbage are in the same family, so you don't want to have those next to each other. Or it might be because tomatoes and cabbage may have issue next to each other, or whatever the reason being. But so to the point, I mentioned the pests and how they find what they're looking for and all of that. But on the other hand, there's all these insects that are really good for your garden too. So we have this beneficials tab, and you're not going to see this in the app right now, but you will next week. Hopefully, we're in the process of trying to get this update through the Apple Store and all that kind of stuff. But we have a list of all the things in your garden that can be good. Now, some of these are on both good and bad. Things like birds, for example. Birds can be a pest for your seeds, but they can also really help you control caterpillars. So we talk about how to do things like with birds, for example. You can have a motion-activated sprinkler in the areas where you don't want them to be. So if there's a freshly seeded bed, put a motion-activated sprinkler on that. They come over there, it's going to spray at them, scare them away. But the other areas, you're okay with them being in. So, and there's all sorts of beneficial insects. So you can attract, bumblebees and butterflies. And we list through, like for butterflies, it'll list out which plants you can plant to draw them in and that type of thing as well. On the critters tab, you can go and see every pest that's in the app. So the interface I was showing a moment ago shows you the pest, this one here, shows you the pest specific to that vegetable. So these are things that attack just that vegetable. But if you go to critters, you can see everything that we have in the app. So I know I covered a lot of material, and I wanted to stop and take, are there any questions or anything you want to know more about? Any particular sections we want to dive into more? Are you tired of hearing about gardening now?
Or excited.
Yeah.
Yes, good.
We have a couple of minutes.
Check it out. I'm very impressed by it.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's on your website.
Yeah, so you can search for From Seed to Spoon in any of the app stores or seedtospoon.net. We have links to it and everything. We also, we're recording this right now. We record everything we do. We put all those up. You can go in there and ask us questions. We have a Facebook group we've set up too, where we recruited people from all across the country to answer questions. Andy's in there with me too.
Sometimes.
We've got events like this going all throughout the year. And then on the app, I really want to hear y'all's feedback. So if there's anything that is in there that isn't clear, or anything that we can do to make it make more sense, or anything you'd like to see added, we really want to hear that kind of feedback. Sometimes, you know, like we live this now, so we get so close to it that's hard for us to understand like maybe what isn't as clear. So we really want to hear that kind of stuff and just see what we can do to make it better. So yeah. Are there any questions about anything else? Or yes, ma'am.
When you add the rabbit poop, how often do you guys do that?
So the rabbit manure I put into my compost. Now you could add it directly to the bed, but I've got my kids and babies playing in the bed so much, and I just know they're going to pick up in the end. So I avoid that situation altogether just by using it. I have compost bins set up where I add wood chips, coffee grounds, plant scraps, kitchen scraps, rabbit manure, you know, all the other bulk supplies I mentioned earlier. And I just, every couple of days, I go take his litter box and dump it in the compost and then put some fresh hay in it from, you know, and that's, so.
When I worked on a certified organic farm, we added chicky doo-doo, which is higher in potassium than.
That chicken manure?
Yeah. We added that at the time of planting and then also again in the fall. So twice a year did a direct side dress. So maybe beyond that, it might be too much. So spring and fall could probably be a safe answer.
Yeah, I think with rabbit manure, you should be pretty safe. Chicken can be a little hot, but you should be fine. And then you probably want to work it in a little bit. So it's just, you know, you could leave it sitting on top of this, work it in just a little bit so the worms can get to it easier and all that. Or put some mulch on top of it would help too. And especially if you are going to use wood chips for mulch, one thing you can offset any concerns at all about nitrogen loss is to just have a layer of manure first and then the wood chips on top of that. So you know that there's a buffer of nitrogen between your plants.
And microorganisms.
Yeah.
I had these black beetle-looking bugs eating the tomato leaves. There were a lot of them. They were probably about 1.5 inches long. Weird-looking bugs.
They were definitely eating the tomato?
They were black. They were eating the tomato leaves, the plant leaves. They wouldn't eat the tomatoes, but they'd stroop the plant.
Huh. Does that ring a bell to you?
It's not.
The only thing, like, the reason why I was asking you sure they eat the leaves, because that kind of sounds like fireflies, which can eat, like, aphids and things like that. So it's like, that's just, I was thinking maybe they were on there eating aphids or something. But
Squish them and they would be green. I don't even know.
if you see them again, post a picture of them in our group or send them to us. And that's exactly the kind of thing you can, you know, send them over. And that doesn't sound like, yeah. Maybe if I saw a picture, it'd ring a bell, but like little black bug on tomato, really the only. Yeah, send that picture over. I'm curious now.
I feel like that's really a strong point about Seed to Spoon too. Is if these guys are a lot about community and just learning from each other, and that's how our ancestors learned, is from each other. So we just need to keep doing that.
Sandy?
Yeah.
So I'm probably one of the only ones. I'm an apartment.
Uh-huh.
So I'm apartment gardening, and it hasn't really gone so well. Like I think last year.
Do you have a patio or anything like that, or are you doing
Yeah,
it
I have a
indoors?
patio,
Okay.
So I put them out on the patio, and I
What direction does that patio face?
west.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, so you're getting probably 4 to 5 hours of sun at least.
Yeah.
What have you tried to grow there so far?
Last year I tried tomatoes and they died.
How big was the container they were in?
Not big enough.
Yeah, she gets a smart spot.
Was it at least this
I
size?
was gonna ask what those were.
Yeah, the tomatoes need at least 20 gallons. Like this is,
Oh God.
I know, like I tried to do, no, I did the same thing, I know. My first year, I got this little pot from Home Depot for like $10. I was like, I'll put a tomato in there, and then it died, you know. And yeah, but tomatoes.
I
Like,
did it too, and I was a horticulture student. I was an apartment gardener for 8 years.
See, and I keep herbs alive, so I was like, I feel like
Yeah.
I did something right, and then I got to the tomatoes, and I
Yeah.
Another thing about tomatoes is I would notice that the years where my neighbor had a tomato plant and I had a tomato plant, I get tomatoes. Well, it's because they need to pollinate each other. So having 2 tomato plants can be helpful in increasing your yield as well.
Another thing too with being on an apartment on a patio like that, it's a little harder for you to get beneficial insects in. So having those herbs and things like that help. But if you can do things like catnip, bees love catnip. If cats love catnip, so the cat. But there's all these different things, and again, the app will show you on the beneficials how to draw those in. But that's something that. So do the tomatoes just die? I mean, it was probably the container was the biggest thing. But if you.
I feel like the container was because it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like, it's cute, it'll work, we're good. And then like 2 weeks later, it was like bent over and I was like,
If you are trying to grow tomatoes in a smaller pot, then sweet 100s or cherry tomatoes will do a lot better than trying to grow a bigger tomato. Just think about how much water goes into a single fruit and how much water needs to be in the root system for that plant to take up.
And they have varieties that are made, like if you see anything that says patio or container, like they have varieties that are made for that too, that'll help. Yeah, I hope you win the large one now. I'm pulling for you.
What's your name? What number? We want to give you one.
Let's give out some smart pots. You all ready for this part? All right. So we're going to start with small ones. Wow, they can- Okay, so Carrie, you want to do this part for me? All right, so the first one we have is a 3-gallon smart pot. And this is going to be good for like a small lettuce or something like that. You're not going to want to put a lot of stuff in here. So like a small herb, like if you want to grow like a kitchen herb, like a basil or something on the counter, this can be great for that. So thyme, yeah, thyme would be great. We're going to have an update really soon that for each vegetable, it is going to list the right size smart pot for each one.
oh wow.
So, and I'm not getting paid by them at all. I do get a cut of the ones that sell through the app, but I'm a believer in these guys because I spent a year trying to get people to grow food, telling them to go build raised beds. And then I got questions about like what kind of saw do I get and all that stuff. And I was like, this is just such a barrier for people. So I really believe in these things. So yeah, we gotta give it.
Company too, and it's
Yeah, they're here in
completely
Oklahoma City. They're based here in Oklahoma City. All right, so the first one is who?
Number 2, and that is Sue Ann.
Sue Ann. All right.
Thank you.
Mine are 2.5 years old and they still look brand new. They told me that they have a shelf life of 10 years, I think.
That's what they said.
I've
I'll
used
see.
one for like at least 10 years and it's still doing fine.
I was so skeptical about these, but one of the professors here actually sold me on the idea of them, and I tried them, and I even had this idea that taking a smart pot and burying it in the ground would do better than one that sat up, you know, because it wouldn't. But I was wrong, so they won me over. All right, the next one is a 7-gallon, and this is a little bit bigger size, so you can get away with growing larger things in here. Literally have a list on that computer, but it'd take me a minute to get to it.
I would do like a basil in there.
Yeah, basil would be good. Yeah.
What else? A broccoli with some like Swiss chard around it or something.
You
like
could do a couple
that.
herbs in here too. You could do basil and oregano even here. So
Will lettuce work?
lettuce would do good in here too. Yeah. So who won this one? What's our number this time?
9.
9. Oh, I can't really read this writing. Ariana? Is that it?
There you go. You're welcome. And again, just fill these with potting soil, or make with this size. You probably just put a potting bag. 10-gallon. All right. So we're getting so this one you might be able to get away with one of those patio tomatoes potentially. 20-gallon be better than 15. So I feel like a game show host. I've never felt like this before. Okay. So 10-gallon. Yeah.
A pepper.
Yes. Great size for pepper.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, there are things that grow really well in containers, like better than most things. So there's this thing called Puerto Rican cilantro, which grows really well in the summer, whereas cilantro typically doesn't grow in the summer here. There's also a Vietnamese one, but it does great in containers. So the app too will tell you if something does good in containers. I hope. We need to make sure it does.
One of
Yeah,
our
that's
good
a
friends grows like the most amount of herbs in Oklahoma. Bill Ferris at Prairie Wind Nursery.
Yeah.
He's got a huge selection of really great herbs.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him. Definitely. If you're looking to buy plants, definitely go. I'm not getting paid off for that either. I just really like him, and I believe in what he's doing. Prairie Wind Nursery in Norman. So 10-gallon. Who wins this one?
Number 10.
10.
Cheryl.
That was too perfect. The 10 won the 10. That was, my brain really likes it when stuff like that happens. Okay, next is 15. So again, we're just getting the larger sizes. You can get away with growing most anything in this.
Pumpkins,
Yeah, pumpkins, anything you want to grow.
watermelons, cantaloupe.
And this would be great for an herb. You could fit a lot of herbs in here. Oregano, thyme. You could have a whole herb little collection in here. Potatoes, yes. I'm glad you mentioned. Good job, Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Yes. Potatoes are great in these sizes because normally if you grow potatoes in raised beds, when you go to harvest, you're digging around for potatoes, and if you use any tools, you can nick a potato and then it's ruined. Whereas this, you literally just dump it out.
Sweet
and then,
potato.
Yeah, sweet potatoes are great in these. Yeah.
Tomatoes.
Okay, so who won number 15?
Number 3. Kendra.
Kendra.
Wow, has anybody on that side of the room won yet?
It's their fault. It's their fault.
It's a randomizer. It's not your fault.
Okay, next is the 20-gallon. Again, this is grow whatever you want, and then basically, or a multitude of things. It'll cost more to fill up, but. All right, who wins this one?
Better.
Yeah.
Number 2. Wait, we've already had that one.
Oh, yeah.
14.
14. Mary Jo.
Okay, we have two more. So this one is the Big Bag Bed Junior. So this is the first of the. It's actually like a raised bed here, and this is again, you could grow pretty much anything in here, or a lot of things. You're going to want to put multiple things in here. Obviously, it's going to be more than. Sorry, whoever gets it's not going to be folded up back the way it was.
I got you.
Okay, thank you. All right, who wins the Big Bag Bed Junior?
Number 8.
Larry.
I think yeah.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, Larry.
Try it again. Number 6. Anita.
Anita, all right. Okay. And our last one, this is the big one. This is the one I showed earlier, the Big Bag Bed. This one is basically a raised bed. It's similar to the size of a 4x4. You can put anything you want in it, a lot of things in it. It's the one I like the most.
Okay. Let's see who the lucky winner is.
8.
Larry again. Sorry, Larry.
We really want to give
Man, Larry.
6.
We've already done her too. Gosh, I thought it is.
10.
Oh my gosh.
My goodness.
8.
Nope. We've already had 8.
The
I didn't even do
randomizer
that.
is fired.
Did we do Luann yet?
Luann?
Luann.
Did you
Luann?
win yet?
Okay.
Finally.
And if you guys didn't get seeds yet, come up and pick out some seeds.
Yeah, we've got, and then one more thing I want to mention. Next weekend, we're going to be at right here outside the farmer's market on Saturday. We have literally a box truck of seeds to give away. This company called Grounds for Compassion, they're a local company that makes coffee, and they got a bunch of seeds, and they're looking for a way to give them out, so we got connected, and we're doing this event next Saturday. And just if you know anyone that wants to grow food, please send them out. So, and if you like this class, we're going to be doing these every month here on the first Friday of every month. So thank you guys for coming, and yeah, thank you. I didn't mention the social media thing too. I'll mention that. You can find us on all the social media places too. Just search for From Seed to Spoon. We're in all of them. So